Everybody, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be having a community meeting here to discuss the study on the cost of residential development in the city of San Jose. And in just a moment, I'm going to hand it off to our Deputy Director, Banu, who will start the presentation. And after Banu and her colleague Shelsy are done with their presentation, we are going to do questions. We'll set aside time for questions and answers. And what I would ask is that anyone who has questions that come up while Banu and Shelsy are speaking, if you can send your questions to me using the chat function. That's Jeffrey Scott, and you just send those to me in the chat, and then I will share those questions with Banu and Shelsy, and they can provide answers. Also, if we are unable to answer your question, if you would like, also in the chat, you can give me your email address when you send it to me, and I would be happy to get back to you offline with any answers to questions that we're unable to answer live during this call right now. So again, just submit your questions via chat and submit your email also via chat if we're unable to get to your question today. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it off to Banu. Banu, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Jeff. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we walk through this year's cost of residential development study. This analysis is something that the city runs annually to better understand the conditions of shaping housing production in San Jose. And our goal is to share what we're seeing in the current development environment, what's changing, what's challenging, and where our efforts can better support the creation of homes that meet the needs of the San Jose residents. So this briefing is also a preview of a more detailed presentation that we'll be bringing to City Council on December 8th, Monday morning at 9:30. Next slide, Jeff. All right, so a little bit of background information. In December 2017, the City Council directed staff to convene a council study session to discuss the aggregate impact of fees and policies the city imposes on housing development and construction. And so since then, there's been a council direction to run these studies annually. So we conduct the cost of development study each year to understand how the changing market conditions and cost pressures affect the feasibility of residential development in the city. There has been 3 previous studies of similar reports on this cost of residential development, one in 2018, 2022, and 2023. For this year's study, the city hired 2 expert consultant teams, EPS for the market rate feasibility and then CSG advisors for affordable housing cost analysis. So there's 2 portions to the study, as always. And then this, as I mentioned, we're presenting this in a shortened format. Otherwise, we'd be here for maybe a couple of hours. The full study will be presented in council on Monday, and I believe that's a 2.5-hour session. So the purpose of this briefing is to walk everyone through the methodology, assumptions, and findings that will inform the upcoming policy discussions. And it's designed to really identify barriers in housing development ecosystem and highlight areas that are within the city's control, like policies, programs, fees, taxes, permitting, and that can influence feasibility outcomes. And the analysis really focuses on a various set number of development areas within San Jose, where most recent and forecasted housing growth is occurring. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So the market rate analysis combines publicly available and private data sources. So EPS, our consultant, developed hypothetical project scenarios that looked at current market performance and some of the challenges in costs, so based on total development costs and hard costs, scenarios that mirror typical San Jose development patterns across multiple building types, from townhouses to high-rise towers within particular areas in the city. The additional cost detail data, I'm sorry, I'm getting emails on the side. I should have turned that off. Is still needed to further refine the breakdown of labor versus material costs and hard costs and land costs, financing, but current assumptions reflect available information on what those challenges are. So the city doesn't produce housing directly. Instead, it manages the regulatory, financial, and permitting systems that shape development feasibility. So there are factors of, I'm still on that previous slide, Jeff, thank the context. Oh, thank you. There are factors inside the city control. There are factors that the city can control, like policy design in housing and other departments, their own policies, and implementation of certain city programs, impact fees, construction taxes, and efficiencies in permitting. And then there are those factors that are out of our control, then cost, some market conditions, availability, cost of financing, material and labor costs, and those continue to challenge development costs throughout not just San Jose, but the Silicon Valley in general. Next slide, please. So this slide outlines the core purpose of the market rate study to assess the cost and feasibility of building multiple residential product types under current market conditions. EPS evaluated 5 generic building types and applied them across 4 zones to test the differences in rents, sale prices, fees, areas that are historically represent majority of development activity and are likely to see continued growth. These results are helping the city understand where development might be feasible without intervention and where incentives may be needed for more housing production. So the findings will also be used to inform future decisions related to the San Jose's Municipal Code Section 14.10.310, which governs the city's process for granting development-related fee and tax waivers. So the study's intention is not to forecast long-term trends, but to assess present-day feasibility and sensitivity to potential market improvements and provide council with factual, data-driven insight on where fee and tax concessions may or may not meaningfully improve feasibility. And next slide, please, Jeff. Thank you. So this slide where it talks a little bit about the framework of the analysis. The analysis reflects 2024 and 25 market conditions, capturing the effects of higher interest rates, elevated construction costs, and current rent and price levels. So revenue assumptions are based on third-party market data like CoStar and Redfin, and then cross-checks against whatever we could get, a couple of actual developer performance and experiences. The cost assumptions draw from industry standard resources like Marshall and Swift, which is a construction cost database, and verified local developer performance data. So EPS has noted that individual project feasibility depends on site specifics like site conditions, location, developer capability, and project quality. These all affect performance of any specific site. And we looked at averages or mean of a generic project. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a summary of the performance. EPS has validated its modeled hard costs by comparing them against real cost estimates from recently processed San Jose development applications. So we can see here that for podium and wrap buildings, EPS's modeled costs per square foot aligned closely with the city's actual project performance, so about $424 per square foot, which is somewhat in the range with the performance they looked at. And then for there's close assumptions in tower as well. We can see $610 per square foot to $621. So the analysis acknowledges that while some projects show lower or higher costs than the model, the overall range is consistent with regional norms. This validation process ensures that the study does not understate or overstate cost burdens that are faced by developers today. Next slide, please. So these are the building types that were studied. The for sale building types that we looked at are townhomes and stack flats. And basically townhomes and stack flats represent wood frame, low to mid-rise construction, typically the least expensive building types to deliver. Both types generally integrate parking into the structure, reducing the need for costlier structured subterranean parking solutions. You can get a little bit more density on the stack flats because the units can be stacked versus the townhouses. And then the next slide, please. These are the rental building types that were studied. So we looked at podium, wrap, and tower building types. The podium buildings can go up to 8 stories, but the first 2 stories are usually concrete podium, and they are typically 1 to 2 levels of parking with stick construction above. So it's sort of a mid-range. And then the wrap buildings a little bit lower in cost because it involves housing that are built around a structured parking garage. So while somewhat a little bit more efficient than a podium parking, they do require larger sites and still involve significant concrete work. And in regards to towers, I mean, they're the highest cost building type, utilizing steel construction, and then usually in very dense neighborhoods where there's transit. And EPS limited the tower analysis to downtown, where densities and zoning support this type of product. Next slide, please. So here are the assumptions that were used in analysis that directly affect costs and generic density and parking ratio assumptions. So the density for these product types range from 20 units an acre for townhouses to 50 units per acre for stacked flats. Tower is the most dense, and podium and wrap are assuming similar per unit acres, but podium can get slightly denser. And we also assume the 2-acre site to compare residual land value, which I will explain a little bit further what that is and what we mean by that across different sites. So we can have an apples to apples comparison. Next slide, please. I said site instead of slide. All right. So this is the map of the 4 MLS, multiple listing service zones in San Jose that was studied, and you can see them in yellow here. They represent the areas with the greatest concentration of recent and pipeline residential development. And these include downtown Central and then West, North, and Southeast San Jose. And EPS use these zones because rents, sales prices, and fees differ between them. So this variation impacts feasibility outcomes. And the city prioritized these areas to reflect where land availability, planned growth, and market interest is highest. Next slide, please. So the key factors that affect feasibility is on the market value side are assumptions that was made around rents, sales price, capitalization rates, mortgage interest rates. And on the cost side, the factors are factors like labor and materials, financing costs, again, fees, taxes, permitting, and entitlement timelines. So a sensitivity analysis was run on the changes in these factors and costs. And the consultant has noted changes in market conditions, even modest ones, can shift feasibility. Next slide, please. So based on EPS's modeling, for sale products, townhouses, and stacked flats tend to show positive residual land value, making them generally feasible under current market conditions. In contrast, all for rent products, podium, ramp, and tower, show negative residual values, indicating that they're not currently financially viable today without intervention. So what do we mean by intervention? It could be cities' tax and fee waivers under the municipal code 14.10.310 that I mentioned before. And that could potentially tip the scales for the podium and wrap products, but not for towers. So those would still need something more to be feasible. And EPS found that fee waivers alone are not sufficient for high-rise towers, and market conditions need to shift dramatically for them to become more feasible. And when I mean market conditions, I'm referring to things like material changes in rents, costs, or something more significant in incentives. In some scenarios, modest improvements in rent and reductions in costs, like between 5 to 15%, could enable podium and wrap feasibility. But for towers to be able to be feasible, we would need to see 10 to 35% increases in revenue or reduction in costs. So the analysis frames which product types could realistically deliver housing in the near term and which require long-term market changes. Next slide, please. And this is where we're defining and talking a little bit about what do we mean by RLV, residual land value. So this basically, the formula is showing that its total project value after the building is completed. So what a developer would be able to sell it or rent it for, minus the total development cost, but that total development cost, TDC as we call it, excludes land, the cost of land. So we're talking about soft and hard costs. So the difference of the project value after completion and the total development cost, is the residual land value, which is used as a benchmark in the industry. So this metric allows consistent and comparable evaluation across different building types and locations. And developers often use additional matrix on top of that, like internal rate of return, cash on yield on cost. But the residual land value offers a city a clear standardized comparison. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is showing the hard cost by building type per gross square footage. The assumptions that are shown reflect typical construction conditions for each product type. So we can see for townhouses, it's around 266 per square foot, stack flats 285, podium 380, wraps 380, and then towers 560 per square foot. Although podium and wrap share similar hard costs, parking structure differences can drive a cost variation. So wrap parking is typically cheaper and requires larger sites, as I mentioned previously. Parking cost is lowest for townhouses and stack flats. And then tower with subterranean parking, it can cost $85,000 per space, versus a $50,000 for podium and $35,000 for wrap, compared to $13,000 for townhouse. So, and then we also have at the bottom of this slide is labor making up approximately 30 to 35% of hard costs across all product types, but there's still some research to do around that. And the materials and supply chain volatility remain major drivers, which elevate costs in the Bay Area. So EPS noted that there's a need for a deeper data set to refine the split between labor versus material, but current assumptions align generally in observed regional norms. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the categories of fees that apply to residential development in San Jose. Impact fees include park fees, school fees, inclusionary fees, along with construction taxes. And these fees vary by product type and by location, especially due to zone-based park fees. The city's impact fee represents around 5.5 to 10% of total development cost, significant enough to influence feasibility. And then there are between 37,000 to 70,000 per unit. And the fee structure could really be a lever for the city to consider as it impacts some of the development cases. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the taxes and impact fees that differ significantly by location. And I'll move to the next slide because it's a bit clearer. So we can see in this this graph the total development taxes and impact fees per unit by building type and location. And we can see that the central district exhibits the highest fees. Then West San Jose, followed by see here. Yeah, so West San Jose is the second highest. And we looked at a tower for the towntowns. The towers we studied was in downtown. taxes and fees are pretty high for the downtown as well. Another interesting find was that the taxes and fees are higher for the lower density product types like stacked flats and townhouses, and they're currently lower for rent product types like podium and or the tower and or the wrap. All right, next slide, please. This is covering other soft costs. Soft costs are shown as a percentage of hard costs consistent with industry norms and comprised of categories like architecture and engineering, which typically are representing 4%, financing 8%, which is higher than previous cycles due to interest rate increases. So, elevated financing cost assumptions is what we have here, which further challenge feasibility. And then there's insurance costs, and notably higher for the for sale developments due to construction defect liability risk. And then there's the developer fee and contingency allowances, which are also included in soft costs. Next slide, please. This slide shows another important factor in the feasibility, which is how the city of San Jose compares with its neighbors in terms of pricing. So San Jose maintains lower cost market, lower rents and sales prices than many neighboring cities, which means it has a potential to grow when the market strengthens, which we can see here. This competitiveness is beneficial for attracting future investment here in the city. But in the short term, it constrains feasibility, especially for the high cost building types. The comparison helps us see why certain product types are feasible elsewhere might struggle within this city. And it shows that San Jose is not the most expensive market regionally. And so we see the possibility of if we see a possibility of upward rent price movements, that is potential future growth for the city. Next slide, please. And so here are the key takeaways on the market rate housing study. For sale townhouses and stacked flats appear feasible under today's market conditions. Multifamily for rent products, podium and wrap, are not feasible without any assistance, incentives, but they can become viable if we have the maybe modest market improvements or some strategic fee reductions. And then towers remain far from feasible due to extreme construction costs and insufficient revenue levels. San Jose shows slightly lower cost market than neighboring cities in terms of fees, taxes. They are not usually relatively high to the region. And then we can move to the next slide now, which is office to residential conversion. So we looked at that a little bit as well. And we can move to if we can go back one slide, Jeff, because I want to make some general comments here. So the pandemic has fundamentally altered the office market demand, leading to elevated vacancies across Bay Area and San Jose specifically. So the possibility of converting a vacant, underutilized office to residential is being discussed as a potential win-win. Activating underutilized buildings while creating new housing. But conversions are highly variable, and the feasibility depends heavily on each building's physical and financial profile. So we'll get into that in a bit. And so the EPS did not produce generic cost assumptions for conversions due to high variability, and instead they examined the key feasibility determinants. Next slide, please. So 3 primary categories that determine conversion feasibility were identified as the physical building attributes. So what we mean by that are things like floor plate depth, window access, ceiling heights, column spacing, facade type. And then secondly, market and financial factors. So acquisition price, current owner debt position, for example, rents relative to residential. And then thirdly, the regulatory considerations, so zoning allowances, building code, and permitting complexities. So these factors collectively determine whether a building can physically and financially support a viable residential conversion program. Next slide, please. So the key physical determinants were identified as I've mentioned, the floor plate depth is one of the most important factors. Deeper floor plates create interior zones too far from windows to meet habitability requirements. Window access and availability of operable windows strongly affect unit layout feasibility. Column spacing that affects plumbing and ability to efficiently stack units. And then ceiling height, there's another one, which is critical. And drop ceilings require more height than typical office systems. Then parking ratios, that influences feasibility as well, though older buildings often have limited parking. And then the year built, that often signals whether the building has modern or adaptable systems. These criteria help identify which buildings are potential candidates for conversion. Next slide, please. There's some examples of good versus challenging candidates. Buildings like Bank of Italy building, which was built in 1926, are more conversion friendly due to narrow floor plates, operable windows, taller ceilings, strong street presence, flexible structure layouts. And then newer office buildings like the Sobrata Tower, which was built in 2002, present challenges because of deep floor plates, curtain wall facades with non-operable windows, lower ceiling heights, and central core configurations that impede efficient unit layouts. So EPS emphasized that not all buildings are in the same market are equally suitable for conversion. Next slide, please. So this is the market and financial factors. The acquisition price of the office building is often the largest feasibility barrier. Many offices are still priced pretty high for residential conversion to pencil. And the current owner's financial condition matters too. So owners with low debt or long-term holding power may not be motivated to sell at a discount. And then the lenders view conversions at a high-risk product category due to limited, due to construction complexities. And then the submarket context matters because residential rents have to justify the significant investment needed for the conversion. So only buildings with distressed ownership or favorable acquisition opportunities typically become feasible candidates, is what we're seeing. Next slide. And this brings us to the key takeaways for office conversions. The key takeaway is that the office conversions present a real opportunity in San Jose with strong potential in buildings that align with key physical and economic criteria. But because each property has its unique characteristics, the feasibility varies. So underscoring the importance of evaluating each building individually. So targeted policy tools, such as identifying priority buildings or refining regulatory processes, can help support promising projects that have that potential to convert. So with a strategic approach, conversions could become viable pathway to creating more housing. And that brings us to the end of the market rate study. I'm going to pass it on now to Shelsy Bass, our division manager of the Housing's production department.
Next slide, Jeff. Oh, a little too fast. Thank you, Banu. So as she said, I'm Shelsy Bass. I'm the division manager for our residential development here with the city of San Jose. I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to talk us through the affordable housing portion of this study that was completed by our consultant CSG advisors. Next slide, Jeff. So just to kind of begin, we're going to frame what we found in some of these studies. So our costs here in San Jose are very consistent and comparable to our Bay Area region, and but we are producing smaller unit sizes in San Jose, which leads to a higher cost per net square foot, but that's not due to underlying construction cost. We'll get into that a little bit deeper a little bit later. We do have a overall very good effective cost per unit, and that's due to some scale efficiencies. We are building denser here in San Jose and our city fee policies. And then we're representing a significant share of the housing of the affordable housing that is being proposed in the Bay Area region. Next slide, Jeff. So for some important context regarding how and what information we were using, the data source for our study was collected from the applications that are to the state's California debt limit allocation and California tax credit allocation committees, which are big financing agencies for our affordable housing here in San Jose. It's important to note that these applications are submitted about a year before the construction financing closing so that they can get the construction started is completed, as well as up to like an additional 24 months from then from when actual construction is completed and these are open for residents. Due to that timing, the application budgets can have a variance of about 10% or so as people are making estimates and as things move along towards actual construction completion, tying into actual final cost. So these are lower than what is actually seen when developments are actually opened. And then in the county's Measure A policy and their goals of reducing unsheltered housing, homeless population in the city and the county, we did end up producing smaller units at a higher per square foot basis, but that does help us with our overall unit per unit cost as we get further into the study. Next slide, Jeff. So to talk more in depth about what we actually did study, CSG was able to pull 194 construction development applications from the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee, comprised of information from 2023 to 2025 for all 9 Bay Area counties, as well as Sacramento, Los Angeles, and San Diego. And we collected a lot of data points from that information. So from what location they're in, the unit size, the square footage specifically, the population that was being served, hard costs, soft costs, financing reserves, and all of that. And that's just to make up for the fact that the last study that was completed was in 2023. So this is really to continue and make sure that our studies are complete from year to year. Next slide, Jeff. And so for our methodology, we're looking at those variety of data points that we were talking about and using that to really determine the information that we're going to go into a little bit soon, pretty soon here when we get into the findings. So we did change our methodology a little bit from our previous studies, as in we pulled all applications that submitted during the time frame that we were pulling from versus just a smaller sample size as we had done in 2023 and previous studies before. And then again, I will stress that these are all at the application stage, so some of the costs are going to differentiate from what's actual at final construction close. Next slide, Jeff. And because we pulled those applications from 2023 and 2024, we did have to do some adjustments. So we did an upward adjustment of about 3% per year to keep those costs into 2025 actual cost. We also excluded acquisition costs from our analysis, partially to be able to be more in alignment with the market rate study so that we can have an apples to apples comparison. And secondly, because there are some advantages in the CIDLAC applications, which is the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, to not represent those acquisition costs, or there are times when the land is owned by a public entity and there is a different mechanism of the land cost and how it's represented in the form of a ground lease or something similar. And then it's also important to recognize that the reported costs don't include any additional fees that may have come from city funding contributions because not all of these developments had any city funding. Next slide, Jeff. So we'll finally get into the actual findings. Next slide. So it's important to note that, oh, perfect. As we'll see here, this is our San Jose in context of our region within the Bay Area and the 9 Bay Area region counties. What you'll be able to see here is that the regional costs go from anywhere at about $840 per net square foot in Solano County, all the way up to about $1,436 in San Francisco at our high. San Jose is coming in at pretty much right in the middle at 1,050 net square foot cost, a little over $1,000 of San Mateo, Sonoma counties, and right underneath San Mateo's 1,062. Um, our net square foot cost is very close to the overall Santa Clara County of 1,067 per square foot. And you'll notice here that when we're looking at the top and the bottom charts, our top chart is aligned in a way where the costs are escalating in a net per square foot. And then in the bottom, we've kept that same order for the Bay Area counties, and you'll see that there's not a whole lot of correlation between the geography and that actual cost. It's really driven more on a per unit basis by the size of the units and the density of the ability that you're able to put into those developments. And we'll get into a little bit more about how there's some economies of scale in being able to do those denser size developments. Next slide, please. So while smaller units do drive higher per net square foot costs, in this slide, we're comparing our average square footage of the actual units versus the cost to build those units. And so you'll see we have our two highest net square foot per net square foot cost are in San Francisco and Alameda. And those are also our two smallest units that are being done. And some of that is the cost efficiencies of if you're building bathrooms and kitchens, which are the most expensive portions of some of our developments, when you're able to spread that cost over more square footage, it's you get some cost efficiency scaling there. So you'll see in Solano County and Contra Costa County, the average net per square footage is lower, but the square footage of the units being built is higher. But we are consistent with our peers and that higher per net square footage cost is not out of alignment with our regional area. Next slide, Jeff. And so here you'll see that San Jose builds denser units. So on average, we build developments that are 173 units versus our peers at about 154 in Santa Clara and 112 in the Bay Area overall. You'll also see here that we produce a larger amount of smaller units. So we are producing 66% of the units here in San Jose are represented by studios and one bedrooms versus 55% in the overall Bay Area. So this high cost per unit somewhat stems from like regional efforts to reduce unsheltered homelessness and how those units are typically in studios and one bedrooms presentations. Next slide, Jeff. And so for key takeaways, just to kind of wrap us all up in our affordable housing, the cost of affordable housing here in San Jose is very comparable with our other Bay Area counties. We are not out of alignment. We do have a higher cost per net square foot, but that's driven by our smaller unit size. But San Jose does represent an lion's share of the affordable housing development here in the Bay Area, representing 42% of the applications that were submitted to TCAC. And next slide. And that closes out our entire presentation today on the cost of residential development studies. So I'll pass it back to Jeff for any questions.
Oh, Jeff was on mute. Okay. Now you found yourself. Okay, very good. Please, facilitate questions. Thanks.
Yeah. So Banu, Shelsy, thank you very much. So I'm going to go to the chat now, and again, I'll start reading off questions for Banu and Shelsy. And if anybody else has questions, please send them to me, Jeffrey Scott, in the chat, and I will share them with the group. Alrighty, so let me scroll down here. do we have, are the previous cost of development studies or the findings, the reports, are those available? And if so, I can send a link, or Jose, who's with me here, can put a link in the chat.
Jeff, I think we posted them in the past, so we should check to see whether they're still on the website, the past 3 studies that I mentioned. Otherwise, we can provide those.
Okay.
They were presented to council, so they're publicly available. They should be.
Okay, great. And
I just popped the link in the chat that's got a link to all 3 of the previous studies that were completed.
Thank you, Shelsy.
Shelsy, you're a star. Thank you very much for doing that. All righty. Next question. Did Measure A contribute or result in higher cost per square foot?
What our study shows is that the smaller unit sizes that may have resulted from the Measure A policy decisions to reduce unsheltered individuals in our county may increased the cost of per square foot, but not necessarily, it doesn't correlate back to an increased cost in per unit. So because we had the economies of scale, San Jose built denser housing and we were able to build more units within our developments that may be of equal size of other developments. While the net square foot cost was higher, the overall cost per unit was relatively similar to the other Bay Area regions.
All right, next question. How receptive is the city to how receptive is the city to office to residential conversions, and what flexibility could be offered to support it and make it more feasible?
As the housing department, I can say we're pretty receptive to, because any idea where we may be, and opportunities where we may be able to produce more housing, which is our ultimate goal, to serve the residents of San Jose, is a good opportunity for us to look at. So conversions are an area we're interested in. We're looking at innovative ways of building housing, and this is one of them as well. So, which is why we wanted the consultants to study it and see, okay, what are the factors that really influence that? And then it would be great for us to look further into the potential buildings that may qualify and may turn out to be feasible, and then estimate like how many housing units could really come out of that. Which ones are zoned right, or what kind of changes do we need to make and support in order to convert these into housing. So I think it's an exciting opportunity. I'm just not sure if there's a lot of them, but those that do qualify and fit well would be great candidates, and the housing department would be supportive of that.
The next question, the person says they joined late. Will we be able to get a copy of the study? Yes. So after this, we have the emails for everybody who registered for this call. And if you just give us a couple of days, we're going to have the video of this call, the transcript of this, as well as the presentation that Banu and Shelsy just went through. That will all be online. And we'll be sending all of you who registered for this session today an email with a link. So you can review all that, the video, the transcript, and the actual presentation that Banu and Shelsy went through. So just give us a couple of days to get it up on the website, and we will email that out to everybody.
And I just wanted to tack on a little bit more from the previous question, is to say that, you know, there are 5 city focus areas that are citywide goals. And one of them is building more housing. And I just want to expand a little bit on that. We're really looking to build more housing at all price points, from market rate to low income housing, affordable housing. And, you know, the goal and the aim of this study is to understand, how do we create more conditions to build that housing? As Banu and Shelsy both said, you know, the city is not a developer itself. We help guide policy and conditions for development, and with the understanding of current economic and cost realities. But really, any tool we can use, you know, at our disposal to to further that aim of building more housing, we want to explore and better understand. And if it's a tool that can be fruitful, we of course want to make sure that it's something that we can implement. And office to housing conversion is absolutely one of many tools that we're looking at. Something else that I just want to be very clear on is there's no one great solution to building more housing. If there were, we would certainly be using that one great, beautiful tool. But rather, there's a whole host of strategies and programs that need to be taken advantage of, and that's one of the reasons why we do this study every year is to ground ourselves in current economic realities and to understand the conditions to do just that, build more housing. Jeff, any more questions?
Yeah, a few more questions. All right, next question is, what was the range in the market rate residual land values in the 2025 study? And what was the change from the 2024 residual land values?
Very good question. And I'm going to have to gather that information and get back to you all about that because I don't have that right available to me right now. So
Okay.
Jeff, perhaps they may be able to provide their contact information and we can get that information and share it.
Yeah, so for the person who asked that question, I do have your registration information for this for today's meeting, and so we will email you the response offline after Banu and Shelsy are able to get that data for you. Alrighty. Okay, next one is a little lengthy question. I'll just read it out. Why do you treat land costs as outside the control of the city, relative to the amount of land that you would need to achieve your arena allocation? The amount of land on which San Jose permits housing to be built is very small. As one example, only 43% of the growth area indicated in the general plan has been planned out. What would the effect on cost of development of the city be of the city legalizing housing on more land?
Sorry, I tried to pick up this question, but it's really long, so I'm gonna
So I think
request
what,
that.
I think what the person's asking is if we opened up more land in the city to housing, what would the effect be on the cost of development?
I want to say that this is a PBCE question. Sorry, that's planning, building, and code enforcement, because that's who drives the general plan process. Obviously, we of course work collaboratively with the other departments in the city that contribute to the development process, but real questions about land use should be directed to them. But
Yeah.
Bob, please, if you have more.
I mean, first of all, we don't know how much land that is available or could be. And so we won't be able to, we don't have the data to study what the economic cost impact could be. And there's so many other factors too, as I mentioned, that it's not something that would be easy to project, but it's a good question. And I think that it warrants further study and analysis on what kind of impact it could make.
The next thing we have here is it's a comment, not a question. I'll just read it, and then we'll move on. This person says, if we allow bedrooms to qualify without windows, we could convert offices and warehouses with partitions rather than full renovations. This might help with homelessness. So that person just made that comment there. Didn't have a question, so we can move on.
I do just want to say there's health and safety standards around the definition of bedroom. And I don't imagine a sacrifice around those health and safety standards.
That's right.
Especially given, I mean, I don't imagine any municipal changes. I can't imagine those things to be allowable in the state of California. So I know that wasn't a question, but I just want to say, while I appreciate a suggestion, I don't foresee a suggestion like that gaining traction or even being legally feasible.
And I mean, there's also codes and building requirements that, code enforcement has, and we have to sort of consider that, what the requirements are there as well.
Question: how dedicated is the housing department to studying ways to develop deeply affordable units for extremely low income populations, even if they might not be feasible financially?
We have been studying, and if you look at the history of this department, the projects that we have funded and supported all had deeper affordability levels. And our current rolling RFP, our funding still supports affordability levels that are at the lower end as well. So it's not something that we've stopped supporting, it's still there. And Shelsy, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I'd say that the city of San Jose's portfolio leans to the more deeply affordable side. The city has a portfolio of over 19,000 units, of which more than 30% at least are probably at 50% or lower. So I don't think the city is stepping away from our commitment or shying away from wanting to continue to commit to the development of deeply affordable housing.
But we are seeing rent levels that are at the level of workforce housing, like 80 to 110% AMI, average median income. So historically, we've supported extremely low income units and supporting that, and we will, as you can see from our notice of funding availability and our rolling our request for proposals. I'm trying to open up the acronyms that we continue to support supportive housing. I think it would be helpful to also mention that January 27th for now is anticipated to be a council housing day where a lot of items will be going to council. And one of that is the inclusionary housing ordinance and the incentive programs for market rate. So I recommend that you all tune in for that. There's a lot of items going that changes and updates we're making.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, Banu. Then there will be additional communication coming out from the housing department between now and the end of January with more information about that housing day on the city council agenda. Okay, the next question. Have you looked at the effect of the city's NOFA requirements on the cost per unit? For example, prioritizing the inclusion of childcare and food distribution.
NOFA, the last NOFA was designed with you and your team, Shelsy, so you can take this one.
So I will say that the city has in our current rolling requests for proposals, also trying to open up those acronyms, and notices of funding availability. We haven't included that requirement for childcare facilities any longer, but there was a desire. But I do believe that for the few that did move forward with childcare facilities, we were also helping with the subsidy for the tenant improvements for those as well. So let me think. Jeff, can you repeat the question so I can make sure I answered it in its entirety?
Yes, I'll just read it off verbatim. Have you looked at the effect of city NOFA requirements on cost per unit? For example, prioritizing the inclusion of childcare and food distribution centers.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to note is that those weren't requirements as much as they were as bonus points. So it did increase your ability to score, but it did not diminish your ability to move forward if you did not include those.
And
Banu,
when
did
it
you want to
comes,
add anything?
I mean, if you'll see in our prior notice of funding availability, there were bonus points for childcare and other things. And if that's a cost impact on the entire project, that's a discussion with in terms of the funding request they have. But our funding supports the production of the units, so not the commercial build out. Although it may impact their overall total development cost. And we have supported a few projects through other funding sources for build out of childcare because we are well aware of the shortage of childcare centers in San Jose. So through some ARPA funds and things like that, there are at least 2 projects that we were able to support in terms of funding through a different funding source because our core funding sources require that we put those funds into the direct production of units. Hope that helps.
Next question. Has any research been done in San Jose on the cost to build other types of housing? For example, missing middle housing, ADUs, infill housing and other types of housing.
I missed the first part, sorry.
Has any research been done on the cost to develop other types of housing? And then those were examples: missing middle housing, ADUs, infill housing, other types of housing.
I think PPC planning department is doing some studies around missing middle. We were going to include it, but because they're doing it, I think I would advise that you guys follow what the studies they're working on. And missing middle is one of those. And then the other one was ADUs, right, Jeff? The other example.
Yeah.
We haven't done an in-depth analysis around ADUs. And it is an area that I think we could look at, but it hasn't been a very main topic of research yet, I have to say.
Just a real quick time check here. We're approaching the top of the hour, so we're going to take 2 more questions. And as I said at the beginning of this call, we do have the contact information for everybody. So for people who have submitted questions that we're not going to have time to get to, we will respond to you by email, and we will we'll gather the responses to your questions offline and send them to you by email. And then the other thing I wanted to say, just to reiterate what Banu said at the beginning of this call, and that is there is a city council study session on Monday. It will go into quite a bit of detail on this topic on the cost of residential development. It's like a 2 or 2.5 hour session. So I would encourage all of you to who are interested in this topic to join in or watch the city council study session on Monday, when there's sure to be a much deeper dive on this. So
Yes,
with that, I'll
right.
try to get a couple more questions in before we adjourn. Question: how does the city plan to drive down the cost of towers built with steel? And then the person gives a range of driving down cost by 10 to 35%.
I mean, I wish I had a solution for that. The findings show that it's not feasible because there needs to be some significant changes for it to become feasible. We talked about that it's the costliest, and it has its feasibility challenges. And how do we create that is a good question. And perhaps that's going to be a topic of discussion at council on Monday, as we do a much deeper dive into the challenges for each building type. There are incentives, a multi-housing family incentive program and the downtown incentive program that is able to offer, reduction in taxes and fees for a market rate development. But when those are not sufficient, they don't really move the needle as much for towers. So I think that's more of a general council policy question, and we'll be seeing what kind of discussions there will be around that to support the development of more towers here on Monday.
Our last question today we have time for: has the city looked at new construction methods which may be able to bring the cost and time to build down drastically? And the person gives some examples. There are certified panelizing building systems being used in other cities like Los Altos, Mountain View, Cupertino, etc. And so that is
a panel system. And were there other examples? I know the panel system. What else was there?
It says the Livio building systems, panelized building. No.
I heard so. The housing department is open to innovative construction solutions that can lower costs as well as shorten the timeline to construct housing. Because our goal is to construct housing fast, but of course, in safe and livable conditions for the residents of San Jose. We have looked into modular construction as well as I have talked to manufacturers of panel systems. So we are open to listening and considering various innovative options. Times are changing, and there's many different new technologies coming out on how to build, cheaper, faster housing. So we're not close to that. We're open to that, in fact. And you'll see that in our funding that we published the notice of funding availability. We're looking for lower cost, shorter timelines. So anything that is feasible and provides high quality housing, continues to provide that, we would be open to hearing more of. So do not hesitate to reach out to the department if you have some innovative solutions. We're open to listening to that.
Great. So Banu, Shelsy, and Sarah Fields, another one of our deputy directors, thank you very much for for sharing your insights with us. As I said to everyone, you will be receiving an email from us in the next couple of days when all this information is up online for this meeting. I will also be responding to the people who had questions that we weren't able to get to today. And then lastly, I'm going to leave the chat window up here for a couple of minutes before I close this out. Sarah put a bunch of information about the study session there at the bottom of the chat on how to participate, where it is, when it is, and how to submit comments. So I'll leave that chat window open for a couple of minutes for anybody who wants to take down that information. And
Thank you, Jeff.
you're
And
welcome.
thank you,
With
everyone.
that, I think we're set. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you,
participating.
Jeff. Have a good night, everyone.